Hello everyone, and welcome to our Moa Kids activities for Monday, May 25th. Today we are going to talk about the Archaic Period here in southwestern Ontario, and this talk is based off of the gallery tour that we would do with we would normally do in our gallery space with children, looking at the time periods and how nature and the environment and changes to those or climate changes and other changing factors affected the way that people were living, the ways that they were living within the environment that they found themselves. And so this is the Archaic Period, or the so-called Archaic Period. It's a name given to it by archaeologists in the past. And this time period dates from about 10,500 years ago, or about 8,500 B.C.E., up to about 3,000 years ago, or about 1,000 B.C.E., or before Common Era. And I'm going to take us through a quick presentation and talk about all the different resources and all the different things that were going on around that time. So I hope you enjoy.
Alright, so here we have one of the murals that we have up at MOA. These murals were painted around 2008, I believe, by Western students. And this one is designed to represent what's generally thought of as the Archaic Period, or known as the Archaic Period. And I think this image is probably fairly late in the Archaic Period. There's a lot of different things that are going on here. And before I start talking about the resources and the activities and the tools that people are using at this time, I just want to note that the Paleo Period, which is that right at the end of the last ice age that we talked about in the previous video in this series, as far as we can tell, the people who were living in North America during that early Ice Age environment were living in very similar ways throughout North America. But as we get into the Archaic Period, there's a lot more people, and there's a lot more differences between people in different regions of North America. So the people living here in southwestern Ontario were not living in the same ways. They weren't eating the same foods, building the same types of homes, hunting with the same tools or the same animals, and they were culturally very different and diverse. So what I'm talking about today is very specifically to southwestern Ontario and generally the London region as a whole. So southwestern Ontario as a whole. And at this point in time, as we said, the climate is pretty much what we know today, and a lot of the resources that we have now that are native to Ontario are now available here in this region. So let's see what some of those are. So first, we have berries. Lots of different berries are available here in southwestern Ontario and have been for thousands of years. Strawberries and blueberries being among them. There's about 100 different varieties of berries, possibly more than that. Some of them are edible, so some of them we can eat, and some of them are not. And people would have learned, they would have learned by watching animals and passing down that knowledge from generation to generation, which berries are safe and which berries are not. And so we're going to add them. You can see them in the bottom corner of the screen where the women are picking berries by the bush. And what else could we add in here? Oh, our sunflowers. I don't know what happened to our big picture of the sunflowers. So our sunflowers and sunflower seeds are something that we find in the archaeological record for this region. And mushrooms are another plant material that, or plant resource that people could find. We'll add those into, or find and collect and gather and eat. We'll add those into our landscape as well. And walnuts. There are lots of different nut-bearing trees that are native to northwestern Ontario, or southwestern Ontario. And that includes the walnut tree, black walnuts we have on the MOA site, as well as hickory nuts, beech nuts. Acorns are edible as well. So all of those can be collected throughout their when they were available. So we'll add those into our landscape as well. Wild rice is another regional thing. I think it was more commonly collected up further to the north, but it's available in this region too, and it's a rice that grows in the wetlands. It's an image of it there, and then the usable collected product at the end next to it, and we'll add that into our landscape too. Let's see what else we have here. All right, so we're talking about some of the animals around too. Now, during the Paleo Period, there were caribou, and there were giant beavers, and there were mammoths and mastodons, and all of those Ice Age creatures have disappeared. They've either gone extinct, like the mammoth and the mastodon, or they moved to different regions of the country, like the caribou. And in their place, we have animals like the deer. We'll add her to their landscape here. Deer, but also elk and moose would have been around in southwestern Ontario around this time as well. The reason they're not here today is because of our very large human population. So you have to go further north where there are fewer people before elk and moose are still living in the environment. What else we have? Foxes. So all of these animals are available for food. They are hunted or trapped, and foxes are one of them. We'll add the fox into our landscape there. There are also squirrels. This is a little gray squirrel. We'll add the gray squirrel to our landscape too. Snapping turtles, like this gentleman here. Snapping turtles today are found around the Medway Valley area, around the Lawson site at MOA. We talked about the turtles a little bit in one of our Medway Valley Resources episodes. And we'll add the turtle in up at the top part of our screen. Rabbits as well. So we'll add the rabbit in there. And fish. This is a rainbow trout, which is found in southern Ontario. And people would fish. There's not a lot of organic materials still that are able to be found from this time period. I talked a little bit about it in the Paleo Period, in that organic materials, they rot away very, very quickly. So those are things that were living once. That's leftovers from foods, leftover from clothing, all sorts of different things. They rot away very, very quickly. There is some preserved evidence for what's called a fish weir, a fishing weir. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, a fish weir, which is a type of fish trap, and it's wooden components that create a sort of a trap at a narrow part of a stream. And some of those have been found in an area which is near, I believe, Lake Simcoe today, between Lake Couchiching and Lake Simcoe, to be specific. So we have found some components of these, or some evidence of the fishing at this time, I should say. We'll add our fish into the canoe that the man here is carving out a canoe with a stone tool. And I'm going to come back to the tools in a little bit. But that's where we'll put the fish so we can see him. And I've also added in little crayfish here too, which we find in the shallower waters. And we'll add them into the boat as well. All right. What else we have? We have the beaver. So we talked about the giant beaver during the Paleo Period. We now have the regular sized beavers. They're still around today as well. Their furs are very good for making clothing as well as for food. So we'll add the beaver into the landscape there. And bears. So we don't find a lot of black bears around southern Ontario anymore. There's occasionally, I've heard of a few wandering a little bit further south than we normally find them today. But if we go back in time, 3,000, 4,000 years, and we absolutely would have had bears around this region at that time. And again, it's because there's so many people that live here today that the bears don't, their habitats are not available to them here anymore. So we'll add the bear into our landscape. All right, so I believe that's all the animals and plant foods that I have to put up here. So we have a lot, and there's a lot of a variety of animals and a lot of a variety of plants. Some of them, these are just examples as well. There's a lot more. And so the change between the very cold and winter-like environment that the Paleo people were living in has now changed to a temperate climate like the one we know now. And so not all of these animals and not all of these plant foods would be available all parts of the year, but there would be food available throughout the year. And some of the animals, like the deer, would be available year-round, and others, like the nuts or the sunflowers, they would only be available at specific times of the year. They also had another animal. Right in the very center of the screen here, we have a dog. And dogs are the only animal that's domesticated or sort of trained like a pet. They're part of the group. And the group sizes, I mentioned a little bit at the beginning, were much larger than they were previous to this, before this. And there are sites that date back to this time period that are many hectares in size, as opposed to just a few hundred meters, like the Paleo period, and were lived in longer. And we know that they were lived in longer because there's a lot of garbage pits. So garbage pits accumulate. They build up over time because people are living in one location. And they live there with the dog, who is part of their group. The dog is a fantastic hunter, and so they help the people to hunt, and in return, the people would give them part of the food from that hunt. So it's a very give and take relationship. Both they help each other out throughout the year. And a few other things that we have here. Now, yes, I'm going to move us forward here to, this is a general picture of what's often referred to as a wigwam. It's essentially a very small bark and branch structure. This is just a sample one, but they would be fairly small, and I'm just going to add that into our environment here. And I do want to note that here in southwestern Ontario, this is a forested area. At this point in time, there is tons and tons of trees, which means there's a lot of bark, there's a lot of branches that can be collected to make homes. And so these homes are characteristic of the environment that people are living in. If you go out to the prairies, you will find homes that are much different. Teepees and different types of homes are found out that way. In the much less treed plains, there's not a lot of trees out in the plains. So homes, what the homes are built of, they are based off of what is available. And those will eventually grow into the longhouses that we see in the later villages. But we also have a lot of different tools. So about 4,000 years ago is when bows and arrows, or the arrows, the spear or the arrow points, often referred to as arrowheads, that's where we begin to see these. They start around about 4,000 years ago, which is near the end. It's the late Archaic period. So that's when bows and arrows become in use. And if you've watched the Paleo talk that I did a few weeks ago, I talked about how the tools that were made during the Paleo period were very highly highly technically made. They were very skilled at making the spear points that they were using. And they would often reuse them and resharpen them and reshape them when they were broken. That it doesn't really happen in the Archaic period. People often used them and then discarded them a little bit more frequently. So we don't find quite as perfectly made. They're a lot rougher than the tools that were found earlier on. As well, we find a lot of tools that are for not hunting. They're for sort of woodworking things. So for building the wigwams, for carving out the canoes. There are two gentlemen up in the corner who are chopping through a log with some stone axes or adze or celts. And they're using the fire that they've got lit here to help them cut through that large trunk of a tree. Because stone axes are only so sharp. So that fire helps with that process. Oh, I moved us along, and that's okay. So here's one of the projectile points, or the arrowheads from this time period. During the Paleo Period, we don't find these notches. That's fairly characteristic of this time period, although they vary quite a lot. But archaeologists are able to identify fairly closely dates for these types of tools by looking at their shapes. I cannot. It's not my area of expertise, but they can. And this is another example. This one doesn't have the notches. It has sort of a little square bottom. And these spots are for attaching them onto the stick that makes it into an arrow. By the attachment of the arrowhead to the stick is called hafting, and done with string or with sinew. And this is a picture of an example of a celt or an adze. They're the axe heads, or that's one use for them. They vary in their shapes a little bit, and they can be used for farming as well, but they're not doing farming now, so I think probably axes are more likely. So yeah, and other things that we find are what's called a bird stone. And this is one example of a bird stone that's characteristic of the Archaic Period. And these are generally thought of to be weights for what's called an atlatl, which is throwing a tool that helps throw a spear, and looks sort of like a bird. And we have another example of them here. So, I think that brings us to the end of our... Oh, one more. The gorgets. So these are generally slate with holes drilled into them. Those holes would be drilled in with a tool similar... Can I go backwards? Oh, maybe I can't. Similar to our arrowheads, but a lot longer and a lot thinner. We would call them drill bits now because they are used to drill holes, made out of the same material. And together, this gorget, the birdstones, and the celts, or the adze, are all called ground stone tools. And they're called that because the stone is literally ground, or you grind the stone with another stone in order to make its shape and to sharpen it and do everything you want to do to it.
So that's the Archaic Period, and a few weeks we will talk about the Woodland Period, which is the time period that coincides with the Lawson Village site that is at the museum. And before I let you go, I just wanted to comment on our survey that we have going around, which is for our Moa Camp Kits, which we are thinking of doing. We've had lots of positive feedback for them. So these are kits that can be picked up or mailed out to you with lots of games, crafts, and learning activities, all based on themes. So similar to our regular day camps, but at home. And if you'd like to give your feedback on our proposed idea, you can find the survey at our website, on our social media, and if you are on our mailing list, you may have already received it already and already filled it out. So thank you very much if you have. Later this week on Wednesday, my intern Jessica will be here with some Ontario trilliums for the Medway Valley Resources episode, as well as I'll be back on Friday for our MOA Mad Libs, which is always fun. And Heather will be with us tomorrow and Thursday with some more archaeology from from Ontario. So thank you very much for joining us, and I will see you later this week. Bye-bye.